Good morning, everyone. Very good morning. Shall we begin the session? Yes, today's topic is the Odbc. In the last class, we have finished with the JDBC. That is the Java Database Connectivity. Next is Odbc, Open Database Connectivity. This standard defines an API to use or to work with that applications, how the application can use to open a connection with the database, how to send the queries, update, and get back the results. And applications such as the graphical user interface, that is the GUI, packages. All right. Okay. With the Odbc again. So Odbc standard defines an API that application opens or can use to open a connection with the database and send the queries and the updates. And whenever we are getting the queries, update, and get back the results also. And applications such as the GUI, statistical package, and spreadsheet can make use of the same Odbc API to connect to any database server that supports the Odbc. And each database system supporting the Odbc provides a library that must be linked with the client program. Linked in the sense that must be connected with the client program. And when the client program makes an Odbc API call, the code in the library communicate with the server to carry out the requested action and fetch the result. So whatever the action, whatever the client program that makes an Odbc API, that makes the code in the library, that makes the communication in the library, that makes the server in the library to carry out the requested action and fetch the result. So figure 5.4 shows an example of the C code using the Odbc API, and the first step in using the Odbc to communicate with the server to set up a connection with the server. That means we are setting up the connection with the server with the help of the Odbc, that is Open Database Connectivity. And to do so, the program first allocate an SQL environment. So first of all, the programmer or the program first allocates an SQL environment. Then there is the database connection handler that is used, and Odbc defines the types HENV, HDBC, and the retrieve code program that opens the database connection by using the SQL client program or connect program. And this code takes several parameters, including the connection handler, including the server to which it is used to connect, user identifier, and the password for the database. And the constant SQL NTS denotes that the previous argument is a null terminated string. And once a connection is set up, the program can send the SQL programs or commands to put the database to the database by using the SQL exe key direct. And the C language variable can also be bound to the attributes of the query result, so that when the result tuple is fetched using the SQL fetch, then its attributes values are stored in the corresponding C variable. Then using the SQL bind call function that also does discard, and the second arguments identify the position of the attributes in the query result. What is the position of the attribute? What is the way of how it is used with the attribute in the query result? And the third argument indicates a type conversion that is required from the SQL to the C. Next argument defines or gives the address of the variable for a variable length types like character array. The last two arguments give the maximum length of the variable, and the location where the actual length is to be stored when a tuple is fetched. So whenever a row is fetched, tuple is fetched, so it is used with the identification, it is used with the rows that is defined with the identification of the data that it defines with the length of the data, length field that indicates that the values are available with the data that the value or the value is null. And for the fixed length type such as the integer or the float, the maximum length field is ignored, and while a negative value returned for the length fixed indicates a null value. And the SQL fetch statement is in a while loop that is executed until the SQL fetch returns a value other than the SQL success. And on each fetch, the program stores the value in the C variable as specified by the calls on the SQL bind call and print out these values. And at the end of the session, the program frees the statement handler, disconnect from the database, frees up the connection, and SQL environment handles. Good programming styles also require that the result of every function call must be checked to make sure that there are no errors. We have omitted most of these checks for the brevity. And it is also possible to create an SQL statement with the parameter. For example, consider the statement insert into department values question mark question mark question mark. The question marks are the placeholders for the values which is applied later, and the work statement can be prepared, that is compiled at the database and repeatedly executed by providing the actual values for the placeholders, and in this case by providing a department name, building budget for the relation department. In the same way, ODBC also defines a function for a variety of the tasks, such as finding all the relations in the database, finding the names and the types of the columns of a query result or a relation in the database. That is a table in the database. And by default, whenever we are using the SQL statement, that is treated as a separate transaction that is committed automatically. And the SQL set connect option, that is turn off the automatic commit to a connection concone, and transaction must then be committed explicitly by the SQL transact, that is a CONN cone and the SQL commit, or rollback by the SQL transact, that is a cone SQL rollback. And the ODBC standard also defines the conformance levels, which specifies subsets of the functionality defined by the standards. And ODBC implementation may also provide only core level features, or it may provide more advanced level features that supports for the fetching the information about the catalog, such as information about the relation that are present and the types and their attributes, that is used with the ADO.NET. This ADO.NET API designed for the Visual Basic, .NET and the C++ languages provides a function to access the data which at very high level are not dissimilar to the JDBC functions. And although details differ, that is either using the JDBC, either using the ODBC, ADO.NET API also allows access to the results of the SQL queries, as well as to the metadata that is considerable or simpler to use in the ODBC. Next is embedded SQL. When we say about the embedded SQL, that means SQL under the SQL. So SQL standard also defines the embedding of the SQL in a variety of the programming languages such as C, C++, COBOL, Pascal, Java, Fortran. And whatever the language in which the SQL queries are embedded is referred as a host language. And the SQL structures permitted in the host language constitutes the embedded SQL. So one is referred as a host language and one is permitted in the host language that constitutes the embedded SQL. And the programs written in the host language can use the embedded SQL syntax to access and update the data stored in a database. So embedding SQL is used with the embedded SQL, that may be a program that must be preceded by the special characters by the special preprocessor prior to the compilation. And whenever we are using the pre-compilation, that is used with the database server, that is used with the database scenario. So an embedded SQL program must be processed by a special preprocessor prior to the compilation, and this also replaces the embedded SQL execution or SQL request with the host language, declaration, and procedure code that allows runtime execution of the database access. Then the resulting program is compiled by the host language compiler that will be done by the database access that is done by the embedded SQL and the JDBC or the ODBC. So we are either using JDBC, that is the Java database connectivity, either using the ODBC. And in JDBC, SQL statements are interpreted at the runtime, even if they are prepared first using the prepared statement feature. When embedded SQL is used, some SQL related errors, that may be a data type error, that may be coded by at the compile time. So to identify the embedded SQL request to the preprocessor, we use the exec SQL statement that is has a form that has a goal exec SQL embedded SQL statement. And the exact definition syntax for the embedded SQL request depends on the language in which SQL is embedded. And in most of the languages such as a COBOL, the semicolon is replaced with the end exec. So we place the statement SQL include SQLCA in the program that will be used to identify the place where the preprocessor should insert the special variables used for communication between the programs and the database systems. And before executing any SQL statement, the program must first connect to the database, that is done using exec SQL connect to server username using password. And here the server identifies the server to which a connection is to be established. And the variables of the host language can be used within the embedded SQL statement, but they must be preceded by the semicolon, that must be preceded by the colon only to distinguish them from the SQL variables. And variables used as above must be declared within a declare section, and the syntax we use, that is exec SQL begin declare section int credit amount exec SQL end declare section. So that are similar in form to regular SQL statement. That is, however, several important differences are also used to write a relational query. So when we write a relational query, we use a declare cursor. There is a term declare cursor statement, and the result of the query is not yet computed. Rather, the program must use the open and the fetch commands to obtain the result tuples. And the use of the cursor is also analogous to iterating through the result set in the JDBC. So consider the unit schema. Assume that we have a host language variable credit amount in our program that is declared as we saw earlier, and we wish to find the names of all the statement student who have taken more than credit amount credit hours. So we can write this query as follows. That is exec SQL declare C cursor for select ID name from student where total credit is greater than colon credit amount. And the variable C in the preceding expression is also known as a cursor for the query, and we use this variable to identify the query. So we then use the open statement that causes the query to be evaluated. So the open statement for the sample query is as follows: exec SQL open C. That is defined with the host language, that is defined with the variable, that is the credit amount, at the time of opening the statement that has been executed. Now there are two types of fetch that is used in this. One is a single fetch, one is a multi-fetch. We must close, or we must use the close statement to tell the database system to delete the temporary relation that hides the result of the query. For example, this statement takes the form exec SQL close C, and the embedded SQL expression for the database modification, update, insert, delete, that do not return a result. So exec SQL any valid update, insert, or delete. So host languages variables that must be preceded by the colon that may also appear in the SQL database modification expression. That can be updated through the cursors. Suppose if we want to add 100 to the salary variable of every instructor in the music department, we could declare a cursor as follows. This is executable SQL. Declare the cursor for the select asterisk from instructor where the department name is music for the update. Now, I have mentioned over here that is used for the update. That means any changes that I made to this, to the select or declare C cursor. So we then iterate through the tuples by performing the fetch operations on the cursor, and after fetching each tuple, we execute the following code. This is exec SQL update instructor set salary equals to salary plus 100, where current of C, and the transactions can be committed using exec SQL's commit or rollback using the exec SQL rollback. So one is a commit, one is a rollback. And whatever the queries that is used in the embedded SQL are normally defined when the program is written out. And there are exceptional or the rare conditions when a query needs to be defined at the runtime. Next is the functions and the procedures that we have already done. This is one of the syntax of using the function. This is create function, any name of the function. So create function, function name, then variable or data type, then department name, varchar is the data type. That means in this, yes, very good, any length characters will be embedded. Varchar 20. This is not specified that we are using only 20 characters. Then returns integer, begin, declare dcount integer, select count as string into dcount from instructor, where instructor.department name equals to department name, return dcount, end. So we illustrate some of the differences for the case of the Oracle also, that is used with the system manual, and although the parts of the system or the syntax that is present may not supported on the such system, and the concepts are applicable across the implementation. Then declaring and invoking the SQL functions in the procedures. So select department name budget from instructor, where department count, department name is greater than 20.